Hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well. I will introduce you and then we can start.
Sure.
So Professor Binod Khadria is ending with a keynote conference on migration. Sort of takes the pulse of the state of art of North American studies and integration in the future. He's an economist. I will read his bio in a minute. What I wanted to say, and probably he will talk about it in the beginning of the conference, is that this conference is coming with a field work included, because he should have been here. He had his plane ticket and we had to cancel 2 hours before he was taking the flight to Mexico. And this is because of the discretionality of migration policies in the US. He was not sure he would be allowed to go back to the US. So he can tell more about it. Professor Binod, apart from what I'm going to read from his bio, is a member of this PAPIT project that we have here at CISAN on communication and diaspora diplomacy. And we invited him due to his relation with Mexico long-term. He's currently the president of the think tank Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism, GRFDT, and co-convener of Metropolis Asia Pacific. He's a former professor of economics and chairperson of the Zakir Hussain Center for Educational Studies, School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University, JNU, New Delhi. In 2017-2018, he held the inaugural Indian Council for Cultural Relations, chair at Rogers, the State University of New Jersey, USA. Dr. Khadria earned his BA in economics from the Cotton College and PhD from GNU. He has been a visiting fellow at the University of Sussex, National University of Singapore, a Times Fellow at the Teen Murty House, Asia Scholar at University of Melbourne, and a Fulbright Scholar at Boston University. His publications include The Migration of Knowledge Workers, Sage 1999, 2 volumes of India Migration Report, Cambridge University Press 2009, Indian Skill Migration and Development to Europe and Back by Springer 2014. In addition to scholarly journals and edited volumes, his research papers have been published by the ILO, IOM, OECD, GCM, IRD France, IDE, Japan, Harvard International Review, and the Encyclopedia of the Indian Diaspora. He is the co-editor of the Sage Handbook of International Migration, London 2019, and World Migration Report 2020. Special issues of International Migration Journal 2019 and the Asian and Pacific Migration Journal 2023. He is a member of the International Steering Committee of Metropolis International and the IOM's Migration Research Leaders Syndicate. He has served as a thematic expert at the second UN General Assembly debate on the processes that led to the Global Compact for Migration, GCM, in 2018. In 2023, he was appointed a Scholar of Excellence at Toronto Metropolitan University, and in 2024, an affiliated fellow at the Institute for the Study of International Migration in Wall School of Foreign Service, Georgetown University, Washington, D.C. In 2023, he was also invited to deliver the inaugural keynote address at the 20th IMISCO Annual Conference on Migration and Inequalities at Warsaw, Poland. So this is just an extract from what Professor Binod Khadria has been doing in his career. And we have the honor to have him online, and perhaps that's also nice because we have colleagues from the GRFDT following this conference. So please, Professor Binod, go ahead.
Thank you, dear Camelia. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. You have given the background, and thank you for that kind introduction. Many times it happens that in these introductions, I am reminded of things that I have done in the past and I have forgotten. So it's taking me back to nostalgia in a way. So thank you very much for that. And of course, I have about 45 minutes to speak.
Yes.
Yes, okay. So open borders and closed doors between pretensions, dilemmas, and hopes is the title that we both had a discussion on, and we thought this would be appropriate at the closing ceremony of this Congress, this third biennial Congress. And I'm very privileged to be part of it. Let me begin, that these are three human emotions in migration that I've been contemplating to reflect upon when I suddenly experienced a fourth one. And let me just recite it in a rhyme. I knocked the ice from my bones, tried not to feel the cold, caught in the thought of that time when everything was fine, everything was mine. But suddenly, and here's the parody, all the king's horses, that's the universities, the temples of learning, and all the king's men, the embassies and the consulates, dared not to back me up in crossing the border again. I was so close, yet so far, engulfed in this parody of regret. So before we talk about borders and doors in the shared future of North America, it has suddenly become imminent for me to begin with an irreversible regret that I'm going through in our shared present. It is the sense of helplessness that I shared with Camelia, my host, Director Graciela, and a few close friends in Mexico. It arose from my being turned into a disabled box at the last minute to be physically present among you and deprived of breathing this historic space of academic freedom again. I'm saying again because, as Camelia mentioned, I had the honor of visiting Mexico and being at UNAM earlier also. So friends, despite months of planning and a desperate will to cross the neighboring border last week, here I am cooped up on the Zoom screen, coping with the second best mode of meeting you online. So the technology has come to our rescue. So before I talked about borders and doors in the shared future of North America, let me begin with its shared past of USA, the nation of immigrants, Canada, a Commonwealth country, a Commonwealth member, and Mexico in the NAFTA USMC agreement. As you know, all three countries were once ruled by European powers, the United Kingdom of Great Britain for USA and Canada, and Spain of the Fortress Europe for Mexico, and thus by the European colonial masters of North America. Post-independence, all three countries had open border policies. US and Canada mainly as destinations, and Mexico mainly as an origin country of immigrants. North America thus holistically represents both sides of the migration story and both the global North and the global South. However, there were also very many closed doors behind the veiled pretensions of having open borders. I'm showing you a clipping of Canada, a page of history. A closed door existed 110 years ago when in 1914, the Komagata Maru was the Japanese steamship that took so many Indians to Vancouver. That was a veiled fortress, Canada, although both were parts of the British Commonwealth. Both India and Canada were part of the British Commonwealth. So in 1914, 376 immigrants from Punjab is very much in the news now because of the deportations. India set sail from Calcutta to Vancouver aboard a Japanese steamship named Komagata Maru. The government of Canada refused to allow the immigrants to land, and they were forced to return to India where conflict and fatalities ensued. And many people died on the way. Many people were falling ill because it was keeping docked in the open sea. For the United States, following the literary beginning of this Congress in Professor Wilfred Roset's opening keynote, I hope I am pronouncing his name correctly. His opening keynote was very artistic with films and poetry of the poet Cooper. Let me recite from the well-known sonnet that Emma Lazarus composed in 1883 for fundraising to build the massive pedestal of the Statue of Liberty, which was to stand tall as the symbol of freedom from fortress Europe that shunned the immigrants, and as an ode to welcoming the open border to a nation of immigrants it stood for. And let me briefly, just one stanza from that poem. It's a long poem, but I will just be brief. Its name is The New Colossus, and it's kept in the Museum of the Statue of Liberty on a copper plate. It says, keep ancient land, your storied pomp. That's telling the European powers. Cries she with silent lips, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. That was 1883. And you can see the image, the wide open sea, that was the golden door, the open border, and you can see the bright sun and the Statue of Liberty as a silhouette. So this is a symbol of USA. And within just 35 years of that welcome, in 1917, as this caricature, I have not drawn it, I have borrowed it from 1990 Statistical Yearbook of US Immigration and Naturalization Service, which is called nowadays called DHS, Department of Homeland Security, after 9/11 attack. It shows that in the land of the free, you can see a flag there, if you can read that, it is written on the flag, the land of the free, that the US claimed it was in the early 20th century. The Congress was mimicking the fortress Europe in sorting out human capital among Indians and PAOs. PAOs are persons or people of Asiatic origin, and in fact defeated 3 times the veto by President Woodrow Wilson, who said this bill was against the spirit of America. Let me describe the literacy test wall in this creatively designed caricature. We did have talk about the Trump wall and so on, but 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago, this literacy test wall was there, and you can see the bayonets on the wall are the nibs of pens. It's a literacy test. If the migrants didn't know how to read and write English, then they are not welcome, they are not allowed. The wall would prohibit them, and that's why the nibs were there. And the books are on the roof of the wall as inverted spine of the book. And Uncle Sam is looking down upon these, poor migrants, man, woman, and a child. And that's the symbol that they cannot cross this. And I have put that title there, Keeping Brown Bronze Out of the White West. And this was 1917 legislative measure that created a barred zone that to halt immigration from Asia, Fiji, India, China, Japan, all that on which Camelia has done some work. So this exclusion of Indians, Chinese, and people of Asiatic origin, and exclusion and inclusion of Europeans, Canadians, and of course Mexicans lasted half a century till 1966. And you can see this map. It is an interesting map. All the dots that you see in Canada or in Europe or in Mexico, it's and Europe, it is difficult to separate the dots. They have become completely dark. Each dot represents 100 immigrants in USA from these countries. So this was 1966, just before the amendment of the Immigration and Naturalization Service Act, earlier act, which stopped Asiatic people and other people from the Eastern Hemisphere. And then, ironically, within the next quarter of a century, after 1966, the pretensions about illiteracy to exclude the brown bronze were lifted in 1968. And the Tiananmen Square massacre led to asylum for Chinese students. And glasnost happened in Soviet Russia. A flood of Indian, Chinese, and Russian immigrants altered the map by 1991. And this is the 1991 map. And you can see the number of dots in India, the number of dots in China, and number of dots in Soviet Union. They each dot representing 100 migrants in the United States. So this is the transformation, the transition that we have come in terms of open borders. And among the model minority Indians, many rose to become the 20th and 21st century global icons in the US. And let me just take a minute to explain who these people are and what these icons are. So at the leftmost, at the bottom, you see Hargobind Khurana, a medicine Nobel laureate in 1968. He did not get a job of a clerk in India, in Chandigarh, in Punjab, and he migrated to USA and then rose to become a professor of biology and medicine. He won the Nobel Prize. S. Chandrasekhar, the physics Nobel laureate, his orbiter vehicle is still rotating in the space. And then we have Satyajit Ray, who is an icon of the film industry, who was given the Lifetime Oscar Award by the Academy in 1991. And then we have Kalpana Chawla, the astronaut who died at the re-entry of the Columbia spaceship in 1997. And then we have this a trip to Mars by the Indian Space Research Organization at a fraction of the cost that it would have cost NASA to send. And I'm today standing here in the headquarters of NASA in Houston, speaking for this. So Mars Orbiter mission of 2014 also brought to light the work of the migrants, scientists, and so on. And then very recently in August 2023, we had the Indian Chandrayaan mission landed on the south pole of the moon. Again, it was something that NASA thought that was for the first time happening. And this was because of the migrants. And then, of course, the whole of 1990s at the top left corner, you see Silicon Valley by the Indian IT professionals. That is what happened in the 1990s. And at the southeast corner, at the bottom corner, right-hand side, you find astronaut Sunita Williams, 2024-25. She is still stuck in the space. She has not returned home yet. So we have these examples to talk about. And then if we talk about the CEOs, the Google CEO, Sundar Pichai is an Indian. Satya Nadella, the Microsoft CEO, is an Indian. And then there are many others. The list is very long. I need not dwell upon that. These people are all educated in public institutions in India, in publicly financed institutions of All India Institute of Medical Science, which is not only a hospital, but also a seat of medical research, which is India's top. And you can see from 1956 to 1980 batch, 56% of the graduates left India. That's a huge brain drain for India, but it was the brain gain for the United States and other countries, receiving countries. The three IITs that I have given here, IIT Madras, IIT Delhi, IIT Bombay. IIT stands for Indian Institute of Technology. These were created in India's development mission at different points in time through foreign aid. And now you see that 25% average, the top ones, graduates, have left the country, and they actually are driving NASA. They were given more education here, engineers were turned into scientists, and then, that's how we find that the global knowledge accumulation took place. This is a pie diagram. In year 2000, at the turn of the century, India counted 20 million migrants worldwide, Indians, and they were in different regions, as you can see. and 3 regions had the diaspora. United States, 10%, Gulf, 19%, but the oldest one was Southeast Asia, Fiji, Malaysia, and so on, Indonesia, and so on. That was 32%. So if we look at North America, 10% United States, Canada, 5%, and Mexico and other Latin American and Caribbean countries have 7%. So I would guess that Mexico would at least have half of this. So we can easily estimate that 10 plus 5 plus 3, 18% of the Indian diaspora is in North America. And these numbers have grown to 35 million now. And how does this happen? And how have we looked at the transformation over time? If we look at these 4 pictures, 4 phases that I have presented before you, phase 1 is pre-1991, phase 2 is 1991 to 2001, turn of the century. Then that is the, after that we have phase 3, the Millennium Development Goal period, 2001 to 2015, and the present phase, 2016 to 2030, is the Sustainable Development Goals period. So if we look at the first phase, we find that the professionals were coming, the large arrow, and then the students were coming and going back after graduation. So only very small proportion of them were staying back. But in phase 2, you find that the education market grew in the US, and H-1B visa came, and the labor market was actually drawing upon American graduates from American University of Indian origin or Chinese origin and so on. So phase 3 is you find that education market, OPT, optional practical training extension, and there are, distinctions between science graduates, arts graduates, humanities graduates, and so on. And that actually was feeding the labor market. And without that, the American industry would have simply collapsed. And now we find in phase 4 that 4.6 million international students worldwide in 2017, and out of that, largest numbers are students in the United States. Out of 5 million Indians, you find that 2 million are students from India in the United States. And their age profile is going downwards. They came for postdoctoral research, then for doctoral research, then the number increased for masters, then the undergraduate, and now we find that even school children are trying to have international education. So the entry to the labor market is going to be through the education market. And that, I think, is the trend that we can look forward to. And this is a global 2024 ranking of the bilateral migration stocks, bilateral stocks. And you can find Mexico, United States at the top. This is little less than 12 million, say 10 million, I should say. So this is those leaving Mexico through open borders have continued to top the bilateral corridors of global migration, but are facing many closed doors. When I say open borders and closed doors, there are many closed doors, and I had the opportunity of listening to very, very bright students, postdoctoral, doctoral graduates and undergraduate students of your university yesterday. And I find that there are many closed doors here also at macro and micro level. So let us therefore look at the signs of multilateral pretensions, and people will differ with me when I call them multilateral pretensions in multilateral negotiation. This is over global migration management and governance. So if we start from MDG and come to SDG and then on to GCM, then this is the chronology of events. What was the characteristic of Millennium Development Goal? At that point in time, migration was considered too dangerous for the sovereignty of member states to be on the UN agenda. That was the Millennium Development Goal period. And this is the period when it ended, we had 9/11. 9/11 was a turning point for Canada and European Union overtaking the US as a major migration player. But I should say Kofi Annan I call it Kofi Annan factor. Kofi Annan wanted migration to be on the agenda. So he started working. He established GCIM, Global Commission on International Migration. That is actually the genesis of GCM. And he piggybacked it on the development agenda, because development agenda was the United Nations, blue-eyed baby. So he said migration and development. We have heard this many times, Global Forum on Migration and Development. Where has it originated? It came from the brainwave of Kofi Annan. And then we had in 2006, high-level dialogue on migration and development. 2007, the first GFMD at Brussels in European Union, and it was very imaginatively planned that 1 year it would be in a developed country and next year it would be in a developing country. And so it has been alternating, and now we call them Global North and Global South. Last year it was by France in Geneva, in a Schengen country, and this year it's going to be in Colombia. And Colombia has been in the news because of the deportation and the president sending his own chartered plane to pick them up and take them back, rather than surviving the kind of treatment that the deportees are given. However, newer pretensions furthered the barrier. 2015 SDG did not have a migration goal. And I was actually attending and speaking at the Metropolis Mexico City conference at that time. And when the SDGs were announced, I was a little enraged, and spontaneously I just said in my presentation that first time a tragedy and second time a farce. And I found that the audience was very much in agreement with me, and this created an uproar. And I thought that uproar would reach the United Nations, but who listens to the academic's voice? It was the Syrian refugee crisis, 2015, that was the awakening call. And we find that after that, in 2016, migration was brought into the UN agenda of SDG through the back door, because they started looking at not the 17 goals, but 167 targets of each of these goals. And they found one word called remittances. And that is what was their saving grace. So in 2016, we had the high-level summit, a large movement of refugees. We also had GCR, Global Compact for Refugees. So GCR and the GCM. And GCM was initiated without the protective shield of development. So it was no longer migration and development, although we keep talking about GFMD. 2017, IOM was given the status of a UN agency. It was earlier an intergovernmental agency. And the secretariat of the GCM was placed in the hands of the IOM. But US withdrew from GCM, followed by Hungary. And that was Trump 1.0 time, 2017. So under Trump, it withdrew, US withdrew, and some countries followed suit. But in 2018, December, GCM was still adopted by 191 UN member states at Marrakech, Morocco. I heard about some research being done on Morocco here, comparative research. So it had 23 objectives that I would call are aimed at opening at least 23 closed doors. The 23 objectives are meant to close open the closed doors. So, however, the US had withdrawn under Trump 1.0. Hungary followed suit and closing not only open doors, but also open borders. US rejoined GCM under Biden, but is now poised to withdraw again under Trump 2.0. In between, in 2009, despite challenges of harmonization among the member states, the European Union adopted the blue card. There is a green card in US, the blue card, to compete against the USA's green card. And Germany prioritized IT professionals, and a lot of IT professionals from India who were willing to go to the US actually changed their course of travel and went to Germany. But what faced them was social resistance. They call them Kinder statt Inder, children instead of Indians, the sons of the soil. The sons of the soil was actually very parochial, and Germany had to give up this, blue card implementation. Thus, the pretension of the fortress Europe continued to prevail in multilateral negotiations over migration. These multilateral pretensions have thus failed us again and again, not only in North America, but across globe, because they lead us to the lowest level of equilibrium in being consensus. I have myself attended the GCM debate, and I found how these are debated, how a sane voice cannot stand up against a crowd of people who would be just going by the consensus. So they cannot take unilateral or bilateral decisions. It is just multilateral decisions. In 2005, for example, we endorsed the final report of the GCIM that Kofi Annan had set up, which concluded, and let me quote from that, the traditional distinction between skilled and unskilled workers is in certain respects an unhelpful one, as it fails to do justice to the complexity of international migration. And the last paragraph is, while they, means skilled and unskilled workers both, may have different levels of educational achievement, all of them could be legitimately described as essential workers. This is relevant to this conference today because Mexicans must be included as essential workers in North America. That, I think, is something which is very, very significant. But again, within 6 years of the GCIM report, we find that almost all countries actually became more selective, more absorbing human capital, highly skilled, preferring highly skilled, and shutting their doors on the face of the unskilled and semi-skilled and so on. So I'm not going to spend time on this, but I'm coming to dilemmas. So from pretensions to dilemmas, these pretensions have created dilemmas that we are faced with. Who are we? Who are we in the GCM? The GCM IMRF took place in 2022. After 4 years of the agreement, there was a review, and it gave this concept called the whole of government, the whole of society, and those not to be left behind, not to be left behind. Nobody should be left behind. The whole of government and the whole of society. Let's look at that. Now, the champion countries, they call them champion countries, approach to challenge now comprise whole of government, whole of society. But where are the migrants? Migrants are not there in this binary approach to handling migration. I have been saying this, I gave in writing that there should be a parallel concept called whole of migrants, which will include men, women, children, disabled, LGBTQ, all categories of migrants. They are not homogeneous and their migration problems are not uniform. So no one to be left behind should be turned into whole of migrants. What about the smuggled and trafficked deportees? That is the latest one. I have listened to the interviews of the deportees, and you'd not believe the kind of treatment they have been given and the kind of the illegal routes. Now they are called illegals. They are no longer called irregular. So we started calling them illegal, and then it was not accepted, like the Negro word, like the black word replaced Negro. And similarly, irregular word had replaced illegal migrants, but now it's coming back. What are our dilemmas when there are multiple choices of equal value, or when the so-called best practice is unachievable? We keep talking about good practice, best practice, and so on. Where are these best practices? We have to ask ourselves. When there are conflicts amongst the stakeholders, then the best practices do not hold ground. So good practice guidelines is easier to talk about, to adopt and adapt, but these may not exist. Whereas bad practices exist. So many bad practices exist. And in my India migration report that Camelia had mentioned in 2009, first volume, I had mentioned about bad practice guidelines, that we need to identify the bad practices and phase them out. That's easier done than going after good practices which may not exist and may fall from heaven as manna. So theory of the second, this is my latest thought that has come to my mind, that there is something called theory of the second best in the kitty of the economist. And theory of the second best is you apply when the first best is not available. The good practice is not available, so you go to a less good practice. The best is not available, so you go to the next one. So that is where be content with the second choices. That is important, both as a human thought, as an emotion, as a practical policy, because it has high probability of success, even if the value is little smaller than the best one. So destination country, USA's concern has been about return of students to countries of origin. US has been the home to international students, but I'm quoting from 2014 State of the Nation address by Obama, who was worried, are we a nation that educates the world's best and the brightest in our universities only to send them home to create businesses in countries that compete against us? Or are we a nation that encourages them to stay and create jobs, businesses, and then industries right here in America? So I am saying that these dilemmas will haunt us. The dilemmas cannot be, solved forever. We have to minimize them, but we have to live with hope. So what are the hopes? The hopes lie in the proper understanding and resolution of the trinity of migration conflicts. Migration is a battleground. It is not smooth. We have to recognize that it is a battleground and there are conflicts of interest. There are among stakeholders. And that is what I call the trinity of migration conflicts, not in remaining stuck with the traditional push-pull theories. We come across push-pull theories of migration, which is, I call it a camouflage by the vested interest to divert attention. But actually, migration is decided not by individual migrants. That is only deciding willingness. That is only deciding desire and aspirations and so on. But actual migration takes place through this trinity of dynamic conflict, I call it, and to rhyme it, I call it age, wage, and vintage. Now, the age is something, it is a demographic dividend. India's population is very young. And so countries want Indian labor because that is the youngest labor. And why they want it? Because it is temporary migration, temporization of the migrants and marginalization into precarious and informal labor markets. It's easier to put the younger laborers in those categories and then turnover. You can send them back in the name of return migration and get a new batch of younger migrants. So older migrants are replaced by younger migrants. And then the second one, wage, is if the migrant population is of younger age and temporary, then their wages are going to be lower because they are not senior people. And not only wages are going to be smaller, they are also going to have no perks because they are temporary and there is no question of pension. So the total cost, wage cost, is going to be smaller. And if that happens, then these destination countries are going to have an edge in international trade in goods and services because production cost, a large component is the wage. And that if that is smaller, then they get the advantage. And what happens? Nomadization of migrant families, because the younger people go, if they are temporary, they don't take their spouses, they don't take their children along. And then we find that because of low wage, their savings are low. And because of low savings, their remittances are low. So you can see the interconnections, how this operates. And this is what I think determines that the younger temporary migrant workers are sought after. The vintage is the knowledge accumulation. This is students. This is students. Now you find that all countries are vying with each other. Destination countries, India has about 4 times what is called education fairs, where all these countries, institutions come to recruit students. And they call them recruitment of students. And I was laughing that why they call them recruitment, they should call enrollment. And then I realized actually what they have in mind is the future workers. So it is a Freudian slip that they call them recruitment of students. So it is a Freudian segregation of human capital and reverse remittances. How much money these students bring to their destination countries, nobody talks about. See, India has the highest amount of remittances in the world now for last few years. 15% is the reverse remittance. 15% is not a small amount. And where does it come from? From the pockets of the parents of the students or from the banks that are giving loans from the taxpayers' money. So we have to look into these aspects very deeply and then see how they decide, these factors decide the migration flows and migration stock, not the push-pull. It is here that the global north, US and Canada, and the global south, Mexico, need to innovate together what I have called the equitable adversary analysis, EAA for short, as the new mantra for inclusion in the 2026 review of the GCM. This is forthcoming. Next year, we are going to have the eighth year of GCM and review will take place. And this is where we want voices from North America to back us up. And as opposed to the game theoretic hide and seek moves that either unsettle the settled migrants or replace the settled diasporas by temporary migrants, equitable adversary analysis is nothing but stepping into each other's shoes and trying to look at each other's problem with empathy, with sympathy, with compassion. That is what is equitable adversary analysis is. It could be one useful policy tool whereby the unsettling temporary immigration policy in the garb of return migration. Return migration is a hoax. It is actually, a turnover of older migrants sent back and younger migrants brought in. And it is consideration of the developed destination countries in the global north would be opened to assessment by stakeholders in the origin countries of the global south on a reciprocal basis. This reciprocity, Trump is talking about reciprocal tariff. We also have to talk about reciprocal basis in migration governance. Two immediately negotiable areas that I can think of for equitable adversary analysis: instability of the policy trend underlying the open and shut policy of destination countries of the north. What determines migration? Visa. Nobody talks about visa. Visa is a hot potato and sovereign, occupied territory. Nobody should talk about it. And what happens to visa policy? Nobody can predict a visa policy. Every country's visa regime can change overnight, in 1 day, in 5 years, in 10 years. We don't know. But the decisions based on them or these visa policies are long-term. Investment in education, employment, and so on, global labor market are determined on visa. So there is a contradiction here. And vulnerability of the global south migrants to arbitrariness of return and reintegration practices during implementation of policies is absolutely arbitrary. I can't go into the details, but these are important enough to be looked into. There are two conditionalities. To achieve this through multilateral negotiations, the countries must agree to two conditionalities. One is that the visa policy change, whenever it takes place, there should be a best before date. When we go to the supermarket, we look at the best before date. In India, we call them expiry date. And then we decide whether to buy that those goods, commodities or services or not. But the visa policy has no expiry date. And that is where I say that this condition should be asked for, that the countries must spell out for how long your new visa policy is going to be in place, short of a crisis like COVID or other things. And then international norms and codes of conduct for ushering user-friendly visa and border security regimes. This is very, very important because we keep on raising the visa fees, but outsourcing it, but the treatment that the migrants receive is not homogeneous. That, I think, is something that needs to be talked about. International norms and codes of conduct is going to be very, very important. So interestingly, the first step in this kind of raising the voice started not in global south. It started in the global north horizon. 10 years ago in Melbourne, on 5th of June, 2015, the Australian Council of Learned Academies, ACOLA it is called, released its report titled Smart Engagement with Asia. I had the privilege of attending that function, and I found the report remarkably bold in noting the following, and I'm quoting: Australia's engagement with Asia has too often been characterized by short-termism, opportunism, and focus on monetary gain. Smart engagement, by contrast, means more than the pragmatic emphasis on economic benefits and working towards nurturing wide-ranging, long-term, deep, and mutually beneficial relations based on the principle of reciprocity. Specifically on migration, it added smart diaspora diplomacy should not focus on serving the national interest only. Instead, it can be a vehicle for transcending national divides to embrace broader global perspectives and common interests. This provides a strategic roadmap for North America towards achieving the objective of non-zero-sum game, non-zero-sum outcome for migration. Mexico need not fight it alone for the global South. And I call it WITHER BRICS. We talk about BRICS. Let a new acronym bloom. Cloning USMCA to BRICS. Now, BRICS have these countries. You can see on your left-hand side, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And then USMCA has Mexico, Canada, United States. And if you put Mexico also make a member of the BRICS, BRICS is open now to membership, it can be called BRICSUM. From BRICS, South Africa, we spell it out rather than only S-A and M for Mexico. And if it is pronounced in the oldest Indian language, Sanskrit. Sanskrit, by the way, was the language that was used for the digital revolution in computers. Very few people know that. So if we pronounce it in Sanskrit, Briksham means tree. It's a symbol of climate. Which is more eco-friendly than the bricks, than the hard bricks. So among what I had called the rising southern economies, the rising southern economies would be Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa, and Mexico in the global South. I would like to conclude by saying what is needed is that we need to have a holistic approach where the whole of migrants are not left out. With the proverbial 6 blind men, and 6 blind men, you can imagine, could be some leading countries. These blind men, this is a very popular kind of a story in India, that the 6 blind men, they are looking at the elephant, they are touching different parts of the elephant, and they think the one who is touching the ears says it's a fan. The one which is touching the spears, called the tusk is called spear, and the trunk is a snake, and the leg of the elephant is a tree, and the body is a wall, and the tail is a rope. So nothing describes the elephant. It is talking something else. So unless and until we put them together, bring them under the umbrella of a holistic approach, we will not know what an elephant is. The elephant would remain, migration would remain an elephant. Then only the shared vacuum that we have arrived at in our shared present now in North America can be overtaken by a shared future across the globe, filled with less pretensions, less dilemmas, and more hope. Good luck to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was an amazing conference. And just a little bit of a commercial. We have some previous version of this conference in a book we are going to publish this year in Spanish. So for those of you who are interested, you will be able to read it. And now we can take some questions and comments, also on YouTube if you like. I see a friend, Sylvia, is here also.
Oh, how nice.
And maybe you cannot see it. Yeah, Sylvia will ask.
Yeah.
Well, it's a big pleasure to see you, Binod.
Well, I miss meeting you.
We are lucky, unfortunate, because you were not here, but you are within us in our hearts. So I have a question for you. I would like to hear your point of view regarding the current situation of the UN. Specifically, what do you see coming for the IOM into the future and for the Global Compact? I'm very worried about what is going on, and I would like to hear your opinion, considering that, in fact, you are in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I think this is a very pertinent question. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think, Sylvia, thank you for asking that question. It's a very absolutely topical, relevant, pertinent question. What is the future of United Nations? Now, if one of the richest countries in the world withdraws its support from the United Nations, the funding that goes into it, the funding that goes to the IOM, and the funding that supports all these activities, certainly there are going to be question marks on their performance, on their operations. And this is where I think it is extremely important that these organizations, United Nations, they raise their voice. I don't hear United Nations, UN voice in this. I hear the Pope talking about what is happening, who is battling, bronchial kind of infection, pneumonia. But from his hospital bed, he is still raising his voice, which is unprecedented. And this is where I think the future, there is a ray of hope in that kind of a voice. And that voice will have to be multiplied. They have to be snowballing effect. Because my professor used to tell me that destroying something is very easy. Creating something is very difficult. So we should be ready and prepared to tread a difficult path. And I mean, we cannot say that it is not going to be, it's going to be easy. It's not going to be easy. That's what I can say at the moment. Let's see what happens at GCMs. Their regional consultations are going on, but the 4-yearly consultation next year, 2026, how they prepare for it, that's going to be important.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, go ahead. Yeah, yes, you need it.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I'm wondering, there's such a rise in extreme right xenophobia in many places around the world, and the rising tide of migrants from the global south to the global north, in large part or in part caused by these countries in the global north, conflicts, environment, neoliberalism, and so on. What's your reading on the responsibility and the eventual outcome? Because attracting skilled workers, students is one type of migrant or immigrant, but all of these other people who are fleeing for various reasons, what will happen? And of course, the question probably everyone is thinking about, for the next 4 years, should we write off the United States as a partner in these projects, or how should we consider that? Thank you.
Thank you. Difficult to answer this question, because we are going into prophesizing about a future which is uncertain. And I was giving an interview just about a couple of weeks back. One of the very old Indian national newspaper called The Hindu. The name is religious, but it's a very progressive, one of the most progressive national dailies in India. And it had an interview of a panel of 3 people. I was one of them, and the subject was, will Trump's America be attractive to Indian students? That, I think, is a question where I said, the interviewer asked me, the moderator asked me, what do you think is the situation in North America, in US? I said, if I have to explain, I have to narrate it in one word, I'll call it uncertainty. It is a very, and then somebody added uncertainty and chaos. So that is what is happening at the moment. So this is a test of our resilience. It's a test of resilience in the sense that many people have lost their jobs, their incomes have been slashed. So what is their retention power? how long can they hold on? How long can they survive without this? What can crowdfunding do? You know, all these innovative ways of sustaining against sustaining for a particular cause. When your resources are going to be depleted or cut down, then you have to put together. You have to fight it together. And this is what Mahatma Gandhi did for the freedom movement in India. He gathered the crowds and had a non-violent movement. This is what Nelson Mandela did, is Martin Luther King did. We have to draw these lessons from history. And I'm sure Mexico has its own heroes who might have fought, and there are heroes even now who are fighting different kinds of battles. I think this is where we need to get the support, give the support, and fight it together. That's all that I can do. Who will do it? It's difficult to answer, but certainly universities must take lead across the board. And I share with you, you have called xenophobia and things like that. This same thing is happening in India, you know, for the last 10 years. And why this happens? Because the progressive government also failed. It was a failure of the government that has to be conceded. There was such large-scale corruption when the secular government was there, non-religious government was there for 10 years, 2 terms. They just allowed rampant corruption by their ministers, and people were demoralized, and that's why they wanted a change of government. And now this government has come on a religious plank, and this actually appeals to the masses. And that appealing to the masses can go in the right direction, but most likely it can go in the wrong direction when people are not educated. People are not a homogeneous group, not highly educated. And there are so many, superstitions that believe in religious rites, rituals. Rituals become more important than the purpose. So I think there is a lack of education, lack of knowledge. There may be qualifications. I find, my scientist friends sometimes wonder what Binod is saying. And I said, please forgive me for saying this. But let me tell you that between social sciences and scientists stop thinking about the intellect, about the questioning, that you have to question, learn to question. And that is where we find that the scientists are giving us the best knowledge, making our life comfortable, making poverty, less of poverty, good modes of transport, and so on. But when you talk of movement to bring in change, you don't find them raising a voice. It is the social scientists, the humanities people, the artists, and so on. The opening address was Cooper's poems, or Cooper's, that's a film on the Cooper poem. That, I think, the fight of the Caribbean, these are examples that we have to bring to the forefront, to tell our students, to tell our elders and others, write in the newspapers, or in the public domain. If we just talk within the conference room, it will not go very far. We have to reflect it in the public domain. That's what I can say. But thank you for this very important question.
Thank you. Now we have a question from Christina.
Hello, thank you so much for your conference.
You.
I have a bit of a moral question for you.
Yeah.
I was sad to hear about the initiative in Germany being stopped by this right-wing group with their Kinderstaat in there, which, if I understood correctly, it was their right-wing resistance that ended up sort of canceling the program to accept more Indian immigrants. So my question is, do you believe that, or maybe not believe, but should we pragmatically try to appease the right wing? Like, is that the correct thing to do, or would it be useful in some way? And I'm thinking about these visa ideas you mentioned, like, for example, to have a fixed expiry date in which you reevaluate whether a visa will be reinstated. Or there's a philosopher, Philippe Legrand, who says maybe we can raise taxes on immigrants during these times so as to dissuade immigration, but still keeping the border open. So that's my question. My other observation was, I noticed that you said Australia is in the global north. I myself have used the term as well, but it made me sort of question, because Australia, if I'm correct in terms of my geography, which is not my expertise, but it's in the southern hemisphere. So is global north a euphemism for white?
Yes,
That's my question.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes. So to address your last point, yes, New Zealand and Australia are both in the global north. You know, it depends on what perspective we have. If we go into the space, then we don't know which is north, which is south. And there are inverted maps that you also find. But jokes apart, yeah, that is what they mentioned by Australia. And it's interesting. Are you from Germany originally?
Mexican American. No, I'm Mexican American from Guadalajara, New York, San Diego.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. No, I do have friends in Germany who are very progressive. But I think your question is absolutely important and to the point. And let me say that to what extent, you know, the progressive thinking government tolerate the right-wing movements or right-wing protests. I think governments have to appease all sides, whether it is in large proportion or small proportion, because it can boomerang and it can bring the government down. So it's like no government would like to follow a suicidal policy. And that's where it hangs in a precarious balance, it hangs. So, but I'm not German government, so I won't know the inside stories of what had happened and how they, because you find that the Eastern Germany, there are certain groups who are very, very right-wing movement, who Muslim haters and so on. But I would think that the idea of making migrants pay taxes, higher taxes, you know, this was a visa proposal that Australia was debating, that if you pay a huge sum of money, then you get a fast-track visa all the way to citizenship. And fortunately, and it was supported by the right-wingers in Australia. But fortunately, you know, there were some sane voices who could put their weight on the right place, and this did not go through. But one day it can come through. I mean, you find Indians now, many Indians, not only because of the right-wing government in India, but also because of pollution, climate change. The degree of pollution that you will see, that the city where I come from, Delhi, New Delhi, was comparable to Mexico. I don't know what is the state of pollution in Mexico City now, but at one point they were parallel. But New Delhi has gone far above now. And there are many days when the city is completely shut practically. So many rich Indians, wealthy Indians are leaving the country. And how they are going? Because they are taking huge amounts of investment and getting fast-track visas, right to permanent citizenship, and then to permanent residency, and then citizenship. So this is something which can be very, very dangerous in the long run, because if you have these people, and diaspora particularly, these are people who are going into the diaspora, and I tend to say, I have many diaspora friends, but I tell them that the diaspora thought process becomes static. It's not dynamic. It does not remain, because they have memories. Those memories, the nostalgia that keeps them stuck with that period of time. And as a result, they become more right-wing leaning than, thinking that their own country also has progressed further. So this is where you find that if you have these people who are controlling the wealth, not income, wealth is something very, very important determinant of countries' rankings and standard of living and their retention power. For example, I'm telling you, it was an eye-opener for me and a shock that 175,000 illegal immigrants are from India in the United States today. And I thought that number would be, can be counted on fingertips. It is not so. And so I said, what does it reflect? And I was listening to their interview also and why they were leaving. There was no employment, no useful employment. So it reflects on the state of India, that there is not enough useful, productive engagement for these people. And so they are putting their life at stake and going out. They're not criminals, but when they're breaking the law, then you club them together and try to see that, put them, a label is put on them. And then we see that they are not given the opportunity that they deserve in terms of skilled and unskilled workers. The unskilled workers, if they stop work tomorrow or today, then I don't think we can go to the supermarkets and get the stuff that we get. So we cannot underestimate their importance, and that I think needs to be recognized. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a long week, so I think we have to close now for the sake of our, personal health. And so I will invite Professor Graciela and Professor Juan Carlos to give the final word. And maybe it will be in Spanish, I don't know, but you are welcome to stay, of course.
Ni siquiera vamos a sentarnos porque sí, ya estamos todos con la lengua de fuera. Nada más agradecer a todas y todos los que han estado desde el lunes a las 9:30 de la mañana con nosotros, horas y horas y horas escuchando personas inteligentes y razonables dialogar sobre qué es lo que en este momento sucede en Norteamérica y el mundo. Y queremos anunciarles que ya tenemos fecha para el siguiente congreso, que será del 15 al 19 de febrero del 2027. Y el título del cuarto congreso que estamos proponiendo, ya ven que cada año hemos hecho, cada versión ha sido una interrogante que queremos contestar. Pues la siguiente interrogante sería América del Norte en reparación, ¿verdad? A ver qué es lo que queda de América del Norte en el 2027 y hablemos de qué manera repararla. Bueno.
Pues muchas gracias Camelia por esta última mesa, gracias al profesor y a todos, a todas por estos días aquí de reflexión profunda en momentos críticos, en momentos de transformación. La región muestra una gran salud en materia de interacción cultural, interacción social, interacción académica. Este es un síntoma de salud, de hecho, de todo lo que de lo que estamos viviendo. Y aunque se sienta contracorriente por el ruido mediático, por tantos gritos y aspavientos vacíos, pues aquí están las mentes, los corazones dialogando en un espacio académico, pero además mostrando pues toda la cantidad de temas y la complejidad que hay aquí en nuestro campo de estudio, que es muy vasto, interdisciplinario, transdisciplinario. Gracias también al equipo que mantuvo esto funcionando. Muchísimas gracias, Oscar, Esme, Mario, Margarita y todo el equipo de chicas y chicos de servicio social que hicieron que todo esto se sintiera fluido, que se sintiera como que todo estaba pasando por arte de magia, pero no es magia, es trabajo, es dedicación, es algo pues muy bonito que pongan todo su empeño para un noble objetivo como es este encuentro transnacional. Entonces, pues, muchísimas gracias por haberlo hecho posible también a todo el equipo. Y gracias, Gra, por darme la oportunidad de decir estas palabras. ¿Yo clausuro? Ay. Bueno, pues entonces, no conozco la hora. A las 13:13 del 21 de febrero de 2025 declaramos formalmente cerrados los diálogos de este tercer Congreso Bienal de Estudios Norteamericanos, Futuro Compartido. Nos vemos en 2 años a más tardar.